Leather paint is a pigment suspended in a formula that rests on top of the leather surface once it dries. Many items move and flex during use, so a paint for leather generally needs to be flexible when it dries, so that it too can move as the item moves. Other paints will often flake and crack, while leather paints are usually made from acrylic, so they can flex and retain their position and look really good on the leather as long as it's being used. We're going to look at two of the most popular types of leather paint, the formulas that are in them, and then the best methods for application, so you can decide if any of these will be helpful for your next project. There are a lot of acrylic paints available that can work well on leather. So options are out there, there's certainly variety. But two of the most popular brands are going to be the Angelus, which we've probably all seen, and similar to the Jacquard textile paint, which we've also probably come across as well. Most are going to be water-based and can be thinned out with water if desired for any particular applications. So looking at the paints, they're typically going to have these ingredients. A big one is going to be water. Another one is going to be acrylic polymers and copolymers, and then colorants. Because essentially what this is doing is it's pigment that's suspended in a liquid carrier. And that's going to put it on top of the leather surface, and then once it dries, it's going to leave that pigment and that acrylic there. And depending on some unique characteristics, there are going to be different ingredients as well. For example, if you have maybe a neon or a glitter or a glow-in-the-dark type of paint, then those may have additional elements in there, to help make those compositions perform the way they're intended to. Let's look at types of applicators. So we have our paints. Let's look at how we can apply that to our leather. So the first most common option is going to be the brush. You've probably come across these before, and it's one of the most easy and convenient ways to apply paint to leather. And they are used by essentially dipping the brush into the paint and then applying that paint onto the leather surface. And we'll explore these, we'll do examples of these in a moment as well. Another option is using the edge roller. So many leather goods are going to have unprotected edges on them. For example, what we're looking at here. And so one way to seal those edges is going to be by painting. And so what we could do is coat this edge here in paint, and then essentially it gets applied onto the edge over here and rolled along as we go, and it transmits paint from the end over here onto the edge of the leather piece. So there's a lot of ways to finish edges, but one way is to do it with paint using an edge paint roller. Another method is to use an airbrush. So when acrylic paint is mixed with additives, it can thin it out enough to be evenly and effectively applied by using an airbrush to paint the leather. And that opens up a lot of new opportunities in terms of textures and densities and gradients and things like that. So an airbrush could definitely be a unique and fun way to paint leather. And a few more options include daubers and sponges. So here we have a typical wool dauber. It's basically a small metal rod with a natural wool on the end. And this will pick up the pigment, and then you can use that to redistribute it, very similar to a brush. Another option here is a cosmetic sponge. And this is a small foam sponge that is going to be really good at picking up the pigment, and then you can apply it in its own method just like that. This is going to be great for dabbing as well as moving it across the surface. They'll vary in their precision, so you may get varied results, and like most artistic tools, you'll refine your application methods with practice. So let's look at applying some paint to leather. So you can see up close what it involves and relatively how easy it really is. So for this, we're going to use this sample piece. We're going to use a Angelus paint in black. And then we're going to use just a typical flat paintbrush. And that's all it takes. So what I'll do is I'll put down this leather backer right here, put our sample on top, and then we'll open it up. So here's the paint itself. Just kind of unscrew the top. And you can see the paint inside, or maybe not because it's so dark. So let's see about here. Maybe you could see a little reflection. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll just dip in. We'll get some paint on our brush. And then with that, we'll just apply it. You can see it goes on very smoothly, very easily. Acrylic paint is generally forgiving, so you don't have to be super precise, and comes out really good. So that's one method. Another, as we talked about, is using our wool dauber. So what we'll do for that is we can dip that into this. So what we could do is dip that into our paint here. You can see we get our pigment on it. And then similar to the brush, we just kind of brush it on. It's going to have a different texture than the brush because it's a brush all its own. And so depending on what you're going for in terms of look and feel and finish, this could be an option to create a little more texture since it's not going to be as smooth as the brush. And then we've got another option, which is going to be our Cosmetic sponge. And so for that, usually we could, pour the paint out, but I'll just kind of dip this in over here. And then we'll kind of get some out on it. Or we could even pour a little on it like so. And this is going to be great for, you can dab it if you want a very textured look and feel. That's going to definitely create different than the brush, or you can move it straight across the surface just like that and essentially use it like a sponge brush. And apply your paint that way. So it really is as artistic as you want to be. There are lots of variations for what and how you can apply the paint. And obviously, paint comes in all sorts of colors. So depending on what you're trying to make, you could either buy a pre-mixed color or mix one of your own that will match well to it. So I'll cap this back up and make sure it doesn't get too much air in there. And then what I'll do is I'll show you an example of what this looks like when it's dry. Because here we have our wet sample. And you can even see the different texture application. On the left was our flat brush. And then kind of towards the middle, we had our wool dauber. And then on the right, we had our sponge. So you can see even there's some variations in what the end result looks like. The sponge has probably the finest, smoothest because there aren't any bristles like on the brush or larger fibers like on the dauber. So if we fast forward, here is an example of a dried sample of the Angelus leather paint in black. You can see it takes on a relatively shiny reflective surface. It's pretty smooth. And then depending on the exact textures you want, you could certainly go over this with several coats, use a larger brush. This was done quickly purely as an example and is not any means of a measure of excellence, while it also gives you a look as to what that dried paint can look like, and also giving you another layer of protection over your leather if you prefer the pigment to the natural green. Leather paints are going to be useful for a lot of projects. They can be a primary colorant, they can be a protectant, they can even be an accent piece depending on if you're using it only on a portion or if you want to use it on the entire piece. So the world is your creative oyster. If you have questions, let us know. If you have preferences or experience that you'd like to share, we'd love to learn from it. And there you have it. Until next time.